All right, we're recording. Patrick, if you could introduce yourself and tell us what you do.
Yeah, so my name is Patrick Cross, and currently I do a range of things, but I run a clinic, sports therapy and pain management clinic in City Park West in Denver, Colorado. I work for the Denver Broncos therapy team. Uh, until the COVID shutdowns, I was teaching, I was the clinic director and teaching courses at the Massage Therapy Institute, running a offsite student clinic internship program at Inner City Health Hospital. And then recently have started shifting into project management. I'm very interested in genetics and artificial intelligence and how that's going to be applied to healthcare and a wide range of fields, certainly in the artificial intelligence aspect of things. So that's kind of what I am not necessarily shifting focus to right now, but definitely actively pursuing a knowledge base in at this point.
That's awesome. I'm glad
Yeah.
I asked you that question. Partially because, we were talking before, I teach at a couple of technical institutions,
Mhm.
and this is also a subject that's running around in those conversations too. The last piece that you were talking about, like the genetics and AI.
Yeah.
And this is something that I think a lot of people don't realize. We've been having these conversations, and like we're moving in that direction. I think there's a lot of people who are very hesitant for that, but we have all of our gadgets and whatnot already that are,
Sure.
it's the next step is just like clocking it in to a
Well,
slot your head or whatever.
yeah, the tools are becoming much more powerful,
Yeah,
and with higher levels of power and impact capability with any tool, there's going to be the potential for nefarious uses of those things, and there's also the
sure.
potential for incredible helpful game-changing applications that can impact people's lives all over the world in very positive ways. So there's always a positive and negative to any kind of tool. Artificial intelligence is certainly one of those buzzwords that kind of has the ability to really excite some people and really freak other people out. And then I'd say most people are probably in the middle where, when I start talking about artificial intelligence or genetics at the dinner table, people just kind of glaze over and, you know,
You're like,
don't, I have to stop myself usually. So, yeah.
so this is very interesting because the things I know about you are like you were a skater kid, and then you've become this amazing massage therapist, right? And also a great teacher, a very admired teacher of many massage therapists and body workers, and also working for our beloved Broncos, and having your own clinic and stuff. And a lot of these things happened at the same time. I feel like they overlapped and kind of happened at the same time. And for me, you embody a person who for me, you're the embodiment of a certain kind of excellence that a lot of us talk about but don't get to. You have interests in art and writing and all these other things, and sometimes those things take a little bit of time, but I feel like from what I've seen, you're very consistent, and like and I'm sure there are challenges, right? But I feel like you always ask, like, how can I go to the next level? And so I want to back up a little bit, and if you're willing to talk about some of those things. I mean, I know like every single person is built differently, but I feel like you inspire a lot of people to be like, oh yeah, I can do more. I can push myself more.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's kind of a tricky thing, because anybody who has ever read a self-help book or even gone YouTube surfing on like how self-improvement, there's so much information out there, and the narrative that I see is kind of the strongest narrative is like the believe and you'll achieve, or build it and they will come sort of narrative,
Yeah.
where I think the most popular in the last decade platform for that narrative was The Secret, the
Hmm.
book movie that came out, and there have been others certainly. um, I absolutely am an advocate for whatever positive attitude and, the believing and, and you can achieve kind of mentality. But at the same time, there's a lot of really basic work that needs to be done to achieve anything. And the larger the scale, the more basic work is going to be necessary. So whether that's painting a picture, or building a technical understanding, or becoming an engineer or a therapist or whatever, I mean, there's the intent, and the intent is a great starting point, but ultimately there's not much value in intent other than like kind of acting as a spark. There's value in the delivery, and there's value in the execution, and it takes a lot of time, right? We love to see like the montage in movies,
Right.
you know, somebody going from zero to hero in like 3.25 minutes with a great song behind it. And the reality is that can take years of really kind of redundant and uh, and not so much fun work. And even things
Yeah.
that I absolutely love to do, like painting. The last painting that I finished took 2.5 years to finish, and I I don't know if you saw the piece that
I
I put
did.
up, but basically like a
Yeah.
stop motion like video that showed 2.5 years of work in less than 3 minutes, I think. And there were definitely days that I just was having so much fun painting, and that was a minority of the time. Most of the
Yeah.
days it was like, I'd wake up and like, all right, I've got to paint 1,500 blades of grass today, and that is definitely not going to be fun. And I'm going to drink 2 pots of coffee and, try to not beat my head against the wall while I'm doing this. So
Right.
I think that is the thing that oftentimes is left out of the narrative, is just that there's
Yeah.
going to be, for any goal, and especially the larger scale the goal is, there's going to be a lot of boring, redundant work. And maybe not,
Mhm.
maybe redundant isn't the right word for it, but definitely repetitive.
Right. It's like it's the same idea as like I think people most relate to folks learning instruments. Like you have to run the scales and you have to do the finger exercises, etc. Even vocally, you have to exercise your vocal cords.
Sure.
And I I just I love that reminder because that is very important. I think especially in our culture, we think that we have to be really good at something like right out the gate, you know, um, and
Yeah.
like that's not always true. Like I remember, I was always a really good student, and then I felt like when I went to Massage Therapy Institute of Colorado, where I know you from, I became the C student, and I really worked hard for that C because it was like I was entering into a different kind of brain space that I'm used to being in, and not always being able to articulate it. And so, like, I think that's what people forget. Like, there are so many different directions we can grow. Like, a lot of people just kind of streamline into one area. And I think, like, like I see you doing this. Like I remember in Tai Chi and Qigong, we learn about the five excellences, and it's art, it's strategy, it's movement, it's all of these things, and I'm missing a couple, but it's like trying to push against the boundaries of like all of the different thinking abilities, and I don't think most of us do that. Um,
Yeah. Well, it's a lot easier to just be comfortable, you know.
yeah,
I
it
think
really is.
I've certainly fallen into this a lot of times in my life. The that comfort takes top priority,
Yeah.
and so we want to get to a place where our work is kind of on autopilot,
Hmm.
and our projects are kind of side projects that we think about here and there, and it's more like I'll probably practice that this weekend, and I'll
Yeah.
maybe carve out 3 hours of time to practice guitar or whatever, and end up carving out 20 minutes because we like want to watch a movie or something like that.
Yeah.
And it's certainly nice to be comfortable, and once we're comfortable, then we want to be entertained. And I think a lot of people are just either because of stress or because of not really being sure what they want to do or where they want to go or what they want to accomplish, comfort kind of takes precedence, and then it becomes like, what am I, my main thought throughout the entire day is like, what am I going to eat for dinner and what show do I want to watch tonight? you know uh, Once we have a goal that we really want to go for, uh, then it becomes, usually there's this stage at the very beginning where it's really exciting and we're like
Mhm.
taking steps and it's all brand new, and there's this like, oh my god, it's so amazing that I'm taking these steps. And then that is usually pretty short lived, and what follows that is again just the massive amounts of repetitive boring work. um, and I've dabbled in music as an example. I never got
Mhm.
good at music because I never took the time to carve out hours a week, get an instructor, and
Yeah.
practice chords,
Right.
over and 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 over again, which is what it
Right.
takes to get good at something. So I think it's totally fine to dabble in a lot of things. And even dabbling in things that we don't really end up getting very good at can give us insight that can cross over into other realms of things that we do get good at. Some of the best architects are also musicians or also artists, or some of the best therapists are also people who um, have have drawn a lot and
Yeah.
draw the human body and get a different sense of, or a deeper sense of things. And so there's actually, you're familiar with Malcolm Gladwell?
Yeah.
Okay, so he wrote the book Outliers. I don't know if you've read that one, but that's all based on the 10,000 hour theory. And the
Okay.
10,000 hour theory gained a lot of traction in basically saying, like, if you want to get really good at anything, you have to put about 10,000 hours into practicing it.
Right.
And there's a lot of merit to that. Pretty soon after that book came out, Dave Epstein came out with a book called Range, and Range was
Okay.
kind of the rebuttal to that. And basically, Range says that most of the people who are the best problem solvers, who are the most creative
Yeah.
innovators, are not people who have become hyper focused on one small thing. They're not people with PhDs. They're people who have dabbled in a wide range of topics and can look at whatever it is that they're doing for work, or whatever projects they're trying to create. They can look at it from all of these different angles and
Yeah.
cross-reference all of these different disciplines to basically gain insight that they would not have if they had not dabbled in so many different things. So I think
Right.
we have a tendency to look at people who are dabblers and say, like, oh, that person is like distracted. They're not regimented. They're not like, you know, they don't have that like classic tunnel vision, hardcore focus on one thing.
Yeah.
Um, and that is important. It's important that we have PhDs. It's important that we have high level experts, but um, it's also important that we have people who dabble and can look at things in a way that people who kind of tunnel vision in and hyper focus in
Yeah.
don't necessarily have the cross reference to insight, have those innovative insights.
Yeah. I really appreciate that. I know for my students, I always bring up a woman named Mary Oxman. She's professor and designer and engineer at MIT, who has like obvious love for fashion and art, and also works to create solutions that are in collaboration with nature, like building architectural materials, things like plastic, fashion, like runway kinds of things, all of these
Sure.
things,
Yeah.
furniture. Really brilliant, amazing person, loves poetry and all of that. And I always bring her up because she embodies this very thing. And it's always kind of in my self-defense too, because that's how I am. I like dabble in a whole lot of stuff. And just because I follow my interests, and it sounds like you do too. And so like one question, so I like that, like, there's this idea of like pushing against all the different ways of thinking and experiencing, and also um, like following interests, being curious is always at the forefront. Like, could you have predicted that you are where you are right now and where it seems like you're going to?
Uh, no. I think I think predictions are very difficult to get right.
Yeah,
We can, we can predict. I I think if we really were to write down all of our predictions and see how many of them are become true and are accurate and how many of them are not accurate, the vast majority would not be accurate. And we tend to see the predictions that are accurate as like, those stand out more to us. The
yeah,
ones that are inaccurate tend to like kind of fall by the wayside and we tend to forget about those. So, you know, to simply answer your question, no. And
yeah,
whenever somebody asks, where do you see yourself in 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, whatever else, I have no idea. I mean, I know what I'm trying to learn now, and I
yeah,
know how kind of I know the framework, the basic framework, but the details, nobody knows. Nobody knows. I mean,
yeah,
could I have predicted that, like, I was going to have to shut down the clinic and, through April when all the shutdowns happened and that was going to give me the window of opportunity to more deeply pursue research in genetics and artificial intelligence? No, absolutely
yeah,
not. So I try to stay away from making like specific predictions, but I
yeah,
can definitely tell you the framework that I'm going for. And, you know, I mean, I can tell you what the backstory is on how I came to be where I am, but there's always, one of the things that students and other therapists ask me a lot is like, how did you get the position at the Broncos? Because that's like I
yeah,
remember Mark Manton, founder of MTIC. I remember him talking about this guy who was a therapist for the Broncos. The first time I was going through the advanced program, this was 6 years ago. I was talking about this guy that works for the Broncos, and I remember thinking, sitting there at my desk, oh my God, how do you get a job like that? How do you even what do you even where do you even start? Fast forward 3 years and I'm getting a call from that therapist. I did not even remember his name because he was just loosely mentioned in class. I got a call from that therapist on my way home from the clinic one day, and he said, hey, we need to bring a new therapist on. Can you come in tomorrow to interview? And I was just like, yeah,
wow,
I'll clear my schedule. I'll move things around. I'll be there. Um, yeah, I think a lot of people want to hear this again. This another one of those common narratives that we hear when we read books on success, or we go, to YouTube, or we go take, go do like some coursework, or some seminar or something like that. That if you have the vision and you keep working at it and don't quit, that you'll get what you're looking for. And
yeah,
I don't want to completely disagree with that, because yes, it's important to have a vision and keep working towards it, but there is just as much luck and circumstance that goes into any opportunity that we come across
yeah,
as there is skill set and devotion to whatever we're trying to achieve. So
yeah,
it's not like I heard about this therapist that worked for the Broncos, and for the next 3 years I was like, okay, I'm gonna work towards this thing, and I'm gonna apply as many times as it takes, and I'm gonna go, like, I'm gonna make this happen. It was kind of like,
yeah,
just kind of, I didn't really forget about it. I always held like I'd love to work for a high level professional sports team. I didn't, like,
yeah,
I didn't know what team or how that was going to look or whatever else, but the convergence of the skill set and the reputation that I had built through just being as uh, disciplined about learning and practicing as possible. I had been doing that, but then the reason the position opened up with the Broncos is because one of the therapists, there were two therapists who had been there for almost 20 years.
yeah,
One of them got married and
yeah.
had two kids already and acquired three more kids in the
Ooh,
marriage
yeah,
and couldn't travel anymore. and the other one got a divorce, full custody of his son, and had his mother moved into his house and had some health issues, so he couldn't travel anymore. So like,
Yeah.
if all of those circumstances that had nothing to do with me wouldn't have occurred, they would not have needed somebody. And then it just so happened coincidentally that both of those therapists also trained with Mark Manton, my mentor, 20 years ago. So
Yeah.
when they needed somebody, they didn't like post a job up on Craigslist, or like it wasn't like you couldn't even apply for that position. They just called Mark and said, "Who do you recommend?"
Yeah.
I just happened to be the guy who was teaching his sports therapy classes, and he knew that I was the most interested person in that and had the most
Yeah.
practice with that out of anybody who was on staff. So he
Yeah.
just gave me my number and they just called me. So it was one of those things where like there are probably at least a couple dozen therapists in Denver who were fully qualified for that job. The reason I got it is because of who I knew and the timing of when I knew them, right?
Yeah.
Um,
I get
so
that.
so there's just as much luck and circumstance that goes into it. But what I would generally boil it down to is like, always be open to looking for opportunities. Never feel like if somebody presents you with an opportunity, it's really easy to say, oh, I don't know if I'm ready for this. I see that happen a lot where people turn down opportunities because they feel like they're not ready. Go for it. I mean, unless it's way over your head and lives are at stake, and that like that's, you know, um, if somebody gave me the opportunity to do heart surgery tomorrow, I would turn that down. Absolutely. But, um, you know, if you feel like you have a level of competence that you can probably achieve the goal, even if it's going to be really difficult, go for it.
Yeah.
But it's not getting the opportunity usually is not about what you know. It's about who you know and where you happen to be and
Yeah.
circumstances. Keeping the opportunity is about what you know and how you can, how hard you're willing to work and
Hmm.
all of that.
Yeah. Thank you for that. I think people really do need to hear that. I know I hear that a lot too. Like even like, I'm a professor and a lot of it has been luck and circumstance and people seeing me do different things out in the community and stuff and trusting that I have the mental flexibility to be able to like hop in 2 days before the semester starts, for example, and just try to figure it out. And I don't know. I'm just like, how did this happen? Because I didn't necessarily pursue it, but it was just like it was kind of the same thing. And then I think people have reached out to me like, how did you get this opportunity and stuff? I'm like, honestly, I don't know. Um, Apparently, my work is like people are noticing my work, and I didn't know that they were.
Sure.
And
And
so
it's
that's
not to say that
that's
it's
cool.
completely random. I
Yeah,
definitely don't want to give that impression that it's like that, like any opportunity that we get is like akin to winning the lottery. Now, you know,
yeah,
even the lottery, you still have to purchase tickets to win
yeah,
it. You're not going to just randomly win the lottery if you're not purchasing tickets. But um, there is a way to enhance the
mhm,
potential for circumstances to fall in line with what you want. And a
yeah,
big part of that is who you know, and not just knowing people, but being useful to people.
yeah,
So if you're out in the community and you're being useful to people in the community, that will pay off in ways that we couldn't even possibly have forecasted or predicted.
yeah,
Um, and it's not to say that we should go out into the community and be useful with the expectation that's going to pay off somehow. That usually, I think people pick up on that and know
mhm,
that, like, oh, this person is like an opportunist and they're
yeah,
only here to see what they can get out of it. I think that's like, I think people pick up on that. But
yeah,
if you genuinely want to be of service to people and be useful to people, then it's a matter of like finding the right people to be useful
yeah,
to, and then doing that. And if we are useful to the right people, and happily so, then circumstances will line up in our favor, probably often enough that we can consider ourselves lucky people.
Yeah, thank you for that addition to that. I think people definitely need to hear those things. You're always like you always are like spouting all this amazing wisdom. And I don't know,
I
it's
didn't
just
come up with any of this stuff. I just read books and talk to
you
people.
read.
Yeah.
Well, again, it's just like, like following your interests, being curious, and like that willingness to um like what more can I learn? And like even if it's fuzzy, like if there are big holes, like there's this thing that I'm interested in. So like I do want to move towards like genetics and AI because that is absolutely interesting. Like you're saying like there's a lot that you don't know or understand yet, or even probably how you fit in that conversation. And I
Yeah.
mean, like what does that look like? I mean, I think that would be a good example.
Yeah, sure. So very briefly, the reason I got so interested with genetics and artificial intelligence is that uh, every once in a while there are these huge leaps forward
Hmm.
in capabilities
Hmm.
and outcomes in across any field. And certainly, I'm most interested in healthcare, but I'm also interested in uh, technology that can support renewable energy and reverse climate change and things like that.
Yeah.
Those are kind of the biggest on my radar at this point, but there's all sorts of interesting applications for these things. Um, so, in healthcare, the last biggest revolutionary idea was like doctors washing their hands before surgery, which was actually amazingly hard to implement in hospitals, right? Before the theory of disease, things like that. I mean,
Right.
the in the past 200 years, the biggest leaps have been things that today we look at as like, duh, wash your
Right.
hands before you're going to cut somebody open, or like deliver a baby, right? Or, you know, um, things like that, right? I just finished reading the checklist manifesto by Atul Gawande, and how difficult it was for him to implement checklists into surgery wards, right? Just basic checklists like, did you did you prepare properly? Do you have the extra blood that you need in case you nick an artery or something like that, right?
Right.
Um, and he, to speak to like the range idea, he took that from pilots. He looked at how pilots had minimized problems in 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 aeronautics, and it was simply a checklist, right?
Mhm.
So that is to say that there are these revolutions that happen, these major things that shift the dial on effectiveness and productivity and better outcomes. And in healthcare and in technology, I think the biggest next revolutions are going to come um, from collecting and making useful big data, right?
Yeah.
And to collect huge amounts of data, sift through it, get rid of all the noise, and take the relevant signals,
Hmm.
and then translate those signals into actionable information for anything from EMTs to primary care physicians to whatever in healthcare. Artificial intelligence is going to be the driving force. That is what's going to make it possible for us to take huge amounts of data and distill it into usable, actionable information. So
Yeah.
that's one of the main things I'm interested in artificial intelligence. About genetics, I think within probably, I mean, again, this is forecasting. So like, however accurate this is going to be, I don't know. But I think it's reasonable to expect that within the next 30 years, genetic diseases will be a thing of the past. And that will
Wow.
come in the form of um, CRISPR technology,
Uh-huh.
um, which basically allows practitioners to recognize a genetic variant that puts people at a very high risk for a certain genetic disease,
Hmm.
edit that variant out of the genome and insert a healthy variant. And this will be done, I think, first for things like multiple sclerosis and type 1 diabetes and Down syndrome and, things like that.
Yeah.
Then we'll build into pretty much every disease that is based on genetic predisposition. That will be, we just won't, that won't be a problem. Probably within the next 30 years. The technology is already available. That's the really interesting thing, is that it's not a matter of developing the technology. It's a
Yeah.
matter of creating legislation around
Yeah.
it and proper regulations, because there are some major potential problems and downsides to this technology. It's arguably the most profound and powerful technology, not just in healthcare, but for the human race and for life on the planet Earth.
Right.
Right? To be able to actively edit the genome is, I mean, more profound than I can even begin to talk about in this conversation right now.
Yeah,
But
absolutely.
yeah, so these are things that I mean, the downsides are certainly very important to consider, and and that's always there, right? I mean, people were afraid when the internet came out. People were
Yeah.
afraid when the combustion engine were replacing horse and buggy. People were afraid when you know um, vaccinations came out and
Yeah.
whatever else, right? So with every new tool that especially is powerful, there's potential for that tool being used for nefarious purposes or whatever else. But I think the potential for positive outcomes and huge leaps forward in capability and outcome in healthcare and a huge range of applications um, is well worth continuing to explore this stuff. And I just want to be a part of it. I mean, I love like
Yeah.
reading articles about it and learning about it, but at a certain point, I decided that I don't want to necessarily just be on the sidelines and getting getting my mind blown at least once a week with what I'm learning about it. I want to actually be involved in it and be useful to the cause, so to speak, right? And so,
Yeah.
one of the things that I realized recently was that there are kind of two routes for me, or well, there are multiple routes, but the two routes that I saw for me, I could go back to school, I could get a master's degree and then a PhD and become a researcher in these fields, or an engineer and a digital architect in artificial intelligence. But that I would acquire a lot of debt, and I would be
Right.
looking at like 10 years down the road. I'm 34 right now, so at probably around 44 years old, I would be an intern, and
Yeah.
not super interested in that route. um, I mean, I'm interested in it, but like, if I could guarantee that I'm going to live 200 years, then fine, I would go that route, but can't guarantee
Yeah.
that. So what it became for me then is that I can be useful to companies and organizations that are developing these technologies um, as a project manager, and I can potentially work in both genetics, artificial intelligence, or anything thereabouts, and across a wide range of companies and applications as a project manager. And I don't need to go back to school for another 10 years to do that, and I don't need to acquire a lot of debt to do that. So that became kind of the most viable way for me to be useful to that
Yeah.
cause. So that's what I went for.
That's amazing. Thank you for sharing all that. And makes that's very exciting. I think that field is very exciting. And like you said, and we were talking about it a little bit before, like ethics. We all always need to be thinking about that. And like I teach writing to engineers this semester, and we're talking about that. And these are subjects that definitely make a lot of people very uncomfortable, and it is because historically there has been talks about like eugenics and stuff being used
Yeah,
and other ways
yeah,
that aren't
yeah.
for
The
health.
ethics surrounding
And
genetic manipulation are probably some of the trickiest. Genetic manipulation and gathering and using data on people is,
yeah,
I mean, the
it
ethics
makes us
surrounding that
uncomfortable.
is just massive, massive. ethics conundrum. I mean, that's yeah, that's a really big deal. And that's why I can't say like, oh, in the next 5 years, this is going to be
Right.
available to us. It's going to take,
It's going to take us some
a couple
time.
decades probably to feel out and then create legislation around the ethical conundrums that are unprecedented, that we have never even had to consider until this kind of technology was available. And one of the applications of big data and artificial intelligence that's interesting is automated driving, which seems like, okay, so we just, Tesla and whatever other companies that are like, yeah, it's going to be fantastic that we have cars that just drive us around. It's going to be way safer. It's going to be way cheaper. Uber is going to be pennies on the dollar. People won't even have to purchase cars anymore because we'll have fleets of automated driving vehicles that, we can save thousands of dollars a year on expenses with. All amazing things, but like one of the really interesting ethical conundrums is that electric vehicles that have automated artificial intelligence driven systems are going to have to make choices. Like if you're, as a human driver, if I'm about to get into a car accident, it kind of just is going to go the way it goes, and we hope for the best
Yeah.
because everything happens so fast. I can't think about and make complex decisions when an event lasts less than a second, right?
Right.
But an artificial intelligence engine in an electric vehicle that can process tens of thousands of bits of information every millisecond can look at the next car ahead, look at every car surrounding and say, okay, if I steer the car this way, we will lose, there are maybe 12 lives at stake in this situation. If I steer the
Yeah.
car this way, we'll lose 3 of those lives. If I steer the car this way, we'll lose 8 of those lives. If I go
Yeah.
straight ahead and don't do anything, we may lose 6 of those lives. And then gauging which of those lives are the most high priority lives, right? These are things that the artificial intelligence engines can actually take the time to decide, actively decide on. And so how do we have programmers write in whose lives are more important, how many lives to save, which lives to save? And I mean, these are really, really difficult questions to answer, but they have to be answered and they have to be written into programs. And so
Hmm.
there's going to have to be laws that have never been written before and never even been considered to make these systems a reality and put them into practice.
Thanks for that. It sounds so similar to some of the thought experiments we do in these classes. And it just, and these are things, that's the thing is like, when you're thinking about ethics on a bigger scale, you're constantly bumping your understanding out, and getting a bigger view. And it's like a cognitive dissonance, like every single time, right? Like one is the trolley problem, the one that this reminds me of. And the trolley problem is there's one person, probably someone very close to you, on one track, and there's 5 people on the other track, that you don't know. And you have to make a choice as the only person there in that situation. The train is coming and it's not going to stop. And so do you switch it to the 1-person track or the 5 people track? And I always joke, or do you just walk away because it's too flippin' much, right? Like just like I'm not dealing with this.
And that's what
Um,
most humans would do. They would freak out
mhm.
and shut down and either they just do whatever's reflexive to them, which might be pushing one person out of the way. It might be running in the other direction. It might be curling up into a little ball and closing
Yeah,
their eyes, hoping for the best, because we just can't, it's too difficult and too complex for us to consider those things.
yeah,
Oftentimes, even when we have a piece of paper and plenty of time to like think about it, but certainly in the moment when adrenaline is going and like who knows what the hell is going on in that particular situation. But we have when we have artificial intelligence engines making those decisions, we do have to premeditate all of those kinds of decisions. And that's a really difficult thing for people to do and for
yeah.
lawmakers to regulate.
Well, and then
Um,
another part of the
but
conversation
yeah,
I
I would love to be I never want to have to make those decisions because that freaks me out. But I certainly, though these kinds of problems that this technology and these innovations can solve, I do want to be a part of helping solve those problems. So it's going to be exciting, and who knows where it's going to take me. I don't really know, but
Yeah,
at some point in the next probably 5 years, I will be assisting on projects that have to do with those topics. Yeah.
that's amazing. Do you see like how does this correlate with because I know a lot of things in technology kind of overlap. Like there are things happening in the background that most of us aren't privy to, and there are things that are happening. So like an example is like say the electric car. The electric car is happening, and a lot of electric cars are built in a certain way where whenever we're ready to make that transition, we don't have to rely on gasoline anymore. We can rely on electricity. And then I think there's like hydrogen or something like that. There's other technology after that. And so some of these cars are prepared for that transition, but most of us don't know. And so my question is like, what's the correlation between like genetics and AI, like this data collecting and everything, and also because it's going to be enhancement of our whole DNA on the molecular level. And then there's also this movement for AI as enhancements to the human body. So everything from neurobiology to, body parts, obviously. So there's some ideas that, yeah, that stuff's already happening, I feel like. So like, what's the conjunction there? Or is it like some kind of overlap where, I mean, we obviously don't know the answer to that yet, but I don't know. What do you think?
Uh, yeah. It's a big sort of 3 or 4 questions in that.
Sorry, that's what my brain does.
Yeah. So, uh, trying to think what the best way to answer that is without going on an unnecessary tangent. Um, so, in regards to how artificial intelligence is going to be applied to genetics, I am certainly not an expert in either of these fields, but from what I'm seeing and from what I'm hearing from the experts in the fields, it is that genetics is extremely complex.
Mhm.
There's the first genome mapped out in the 90s took, I think, 18 labs around the world and upwards of
Yeah.
$10 million to just map one genome. Um, Now we can do your genome, or at least mostly mapped out for $100, and it takes you 2 weeks, and you just spit into a vial. 23andMe, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, Depending on what information you're looking for, if you're looking for specific disease information, if you're looking for performance information, if you're looking for personality predisposition information, some of these things are relatively simple. If you have like um, if you have like one variant, like the MTHFR gene variant, then you basically just don't convert vitamin you don't convert folate or vitamin B 12 B6 into its usable form very well. So it's, if you find out that that's part of your genome, you might do really well to supplement with a simple methylated B vitamin complex, something like that. So that's pretty simple. But if you're looking at something like intelligence, that's not just like this variant, this one code or part of the code equals high level of intelligence or equals whatever, right? Musical talent or something like that. Those are extremely complex. And then if you couple that with, so there's a concierge doctor, Dr. Russick, who has his practice out in DTC. He uses genetic testing right now to help people figure out what medications they're more likely to do well with
Yeah.
and what medications they're less likely to do well with. So for example, my sister has epilepsy. And right now, to figure out what the best medication for epilepsy each person is going to respond the best to, it's just trial and error. You like wean onto a medication, see how you do for 3 months. If you do well, great, got lucky. If you don't do well, you wean off of that and onto another one. And there are at least a half dozen medications that are just standard that you might have to wean on and off of. Meanwhile, you're having seizures the entire time, potentially,
Yeah.
right? So a genetics test right now can show what medication somebody is most likely to be uh, to do well with, right?
Rad. Yeah.
So taking information like genetics and then taking information like other medications that we're on and taking information like detailed health history as well as family health history, that it's so much information. It's like it's an unbelievable amount of information, and we can't expect any doctor, no matter how amazing they are at their job, to account for all of that information 100% effectively with every single patient, especially if they're working at a place like Kaiser, St. Joe's, where they've got tens of thousands of patients that they might see each year, right?
Right.
Um, so artificial intelligence will be applied to genetics and healthcare in large part by being able to take all that information, cross-reference it, and then spit out recommendations that are simple for physicians so that they can just say, oh, look here, I've got this chart, and here are the recommended medications. And I didn't have to spend 3 weeks uh, researching all of this and looking at this patient in depth. I had to literally spend 30 seconds just, and I get this recommendation spit out. So that's how AI is going to use genetic information, and a range of other metrics in healthcare to create better outcomes. Uh, as far as the genetics and enhancement issue, that's a really big ethical issue, and that's one of the things that a lot of people who create the legislation around it are struggling with, and why it is essentially, or one of the main reasons why it is highly discouraged that anybody use CRISPR technology on human embryos at this point. Um, so obviously the first applications are going to be for solving problems, but then it opens the door, that technology opens the door for people to not just solve problems, but create enhancements
Yeah.
and say, okay, if I'm a parent and I've got, however much money to do in vitro fertilization, and say, okay, with this fertilized egg that I'm going to implant into, my wife or whatever, whoever's going to carry this, let's just edit out this bit and edit in this to make them, I want them to be 6'2", and I want them to be athletic, and I want them to be very intelligent, and I want them to have, the genes so that the gene variant that makes them only need to sleep for 5 hours a night
Yeah.
and still get all the rest that they need. I mean, things like this, right? These are things that like that will start. I mean, it's the designer baby conundrum, right? And that will be expensive, certainly
Yeah.
at first, which means that you have wealthy people who are able to enhance their children and create an even higher likelihood for success. Um, so that has the potential to really dramatically affect the wealth gap and competition in the field, right? In any field. So that's definitely something that'll need to be looked into before this stuff is available. Um, I mean, the tricky thing is like we can make rules in the U.S. and those rules might not be the same across the globe. So,
Right.
like with nuclear warfare, it's very important that things that can impact humanity and life in general on such a massive scale, it's important that all of the great powers in the world come together and make decisions on these things. Um, so I think those are probably the two questions that you had that I can speak the most to.
Yeah. Thank you for that. That's very helpful. I guess I have one more thing on here. We have about 11 minutes left. And I really want to talk with you about teaching. And like kind of like something, I don't want to lead the question too much, but I know for me, in teaching, like people told me this for a long time and I was very resistant to it. Like, no, I'm not going to be a teacher. I'm not going to do that. I just want to learn. And that's the thing is when you're teaching, that's, I feel like this is my PhD is actually in the teaching, because thinking on your feet and also, you know, for me, like, I mean, my most recent brain breakdown while teaching happened yesterday. And it was because of the way the brains were working in the room and because of the way that they were processing the information and shining it back on me. And there were holes in my knowledge. And so then I get to learn more, right? How to interact with those processes. And then also with this new knowledge that technically I've actually learned from my students, right? And so trying to find those holes. So I didn't mean to lead it that much, but I was wondering if there's something similar there for you. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think whether you're teaching in a classroom
Mm-hmm.
or whether you're just mentoring people,
Mm-hmm.
anytime we get to a level of understanding that we can impart a higher level of knowledge to someone else, it not only is not only a huge asset to humanity in general to have people who are knowledgeable about something imparting that knowledge to other people,
Mm-hmm.
but it also, I wouldn't say it always does, but it should make us more aware of the gaps in our knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, there's certainly that cliche, if you want to learn something better, you teach it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I have found personally that I have had to completely rethink some of the things that I thought I understood because of questions that students have asked me in classes,
Yeah.
or things that students have said in class that have made me realize it's very easy for us to learn something from people that we look up to and or trust or have high level credentials in any field, and listen to what they say and not fully understand it but parrot it back
Right.
as as fact, like we understand it.
Yeah.
I've found myself doing that a lot and will continue to do that because it's hard, it's incredibly difficult not to do that. When we have students, when we have to teach things, oftentimes we will start by just parroting things back that we've learned. And the best case scenario, I think, is to have students who ask difficult questions that make oftentimes very painfully apparent the gaps in our knowledge.
Yeah.
And uh, that to me is very exciting because that when that happens, while it's like, I mean, there's always the undertones of like, oh, that's embarrassing, or oh wow, that's like, like part of
Yeah.
me wants to say, you know what, why don't you just shut up and listen to me? I'm a teacher. Um, but I think the best reaction is interesting. That's, I don't know how to answer that question, and that's showing me what I don't understand about what I'm teaching, and I'm going to have to get back to you on that after I
Yeah.
take a couple weeks and consider this and look into more detail on this and see what I can find out. And what I really love to do in the classroom is if a student asks me a question and I don't really know the answer, or if they dispute something that I'm teaching, which happens a fair amount, um, I will say, okay, I want you to go research this. I want somebody in the class who disagrees with that person to go research it, and then I'm going to go research it, and then we're going to come together and see what we find, what
Yeah.
sources we looked at to find those things, and compare and contrast the answers. And sometimes we go out and we all find the same answer and we come back and we're like, oh, this seems like this is probably the answer. Sometimes we
Yeah.
go out and find wildly different answers, and then we look at the sources and how and why we found different answers and try to figure out which might which is the most likely to be accurate. And that's a really great kind of experiment and game to play.
Yeah.
But in general, I think once we have a level of knowledge on something where we can impart a higher level of knowledge to somebody else, it's just as beneficial to us as it is to them for us to engage in that.
Yeah,
And it
absolutely.
doesn't have to be in a classroom. I mean, it's like teachers across the spectrum notoriously do not make very much money if teaching is your main profession, right? If teaching is the
Yeah.
main source of income, it's notoriously difficult to make a living off of that.
Yep.
Um, so whether it's like pursuing teaching as a career and you're passionate and can make that a viable and sustainable job, or it's just teaching in the community or mentoring people or getting involved with, I don't know, teaching somebody somewhere about
Right.
something. uh,
Right.
I think it's very valuable.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. And I am definitely going to employ that more in my classes. I think I got the first part. It's like, okay, please do the research and bring the information back. And I love like also being like, okay, so now who disagrees, and you find information too. Let's all come together and talk about
Yeah,
it. That's,
yeah,
I mean, because
right.
that's how we
I
learn.
will
Yeah.
regularly tell my students that, yeah, yeah. Um, I love the idea that you really, I think it's sort of a monumental time in anybody's pursuit of whatever they're trying to gain knowledge in when they can start to disagree with their instructors
Yes.
and know why,
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
and then develop I wouldn't necessarily say an argument, but develop a case for why they disagree, that if it's well enough put together should make the instructor reconsider what they're talking about. um,
Absolutely.
that's a beautiful moment.
Yeah.
you know
It's like,
uh, yeah, and there's a whole art to like approaching that. I mean, definitely whenever I take courses and I disagree with instructors, I'm not like raising my hand and saying like, well, like I'm not going to bring that up in the middle of class. I'm going to talk to them after class about it, or schedule a coffee meeting or something like that. But
yeah.
it's also, I think, the duty of the instructor to be able to handle uh, that kind of adversity in the classroom very well, and encourage people to disagree with them. And if somebody's disagreeing because of like an opinion and they can't really even describe legitimately why they disagree, then like whatever, like that's,
Right.
it's just an opinion at that point. But if somebody can legitimately describe why they disagree coherently and back it up, then that should be encouraged. Yeah.
Absolutely. Oh, thank you so much. And thank you for this talk. I always like to leave the last couple of minutes to, like, if you have any additions to say, or, and places where people can like follow your work and support it, if that feels good, or if that, words, bleh, yeah. Like, where can people find your work? How can they connect with you? Those kinds of things. Because I think you were doing
Uh,
some writing and stuff
yeah.
too.
So the clinic is Unlock Bodyworks, and I would say anybody who is curious about, if anybody's got pain problems or needs assessment, or we do nutrition consulting. I do include oftentimes third-party genetic testing in the nutrition consulting, which is interesting.
Okay.
Um, always interesting to talk about people with. Uh, yeah, so that's if people are seeking me out on a professional level, the Unlock Bodyworks is the clinic. If people want to know kind of what I'm looking at and following and interested in, just Facebook and Instagram, I'm usually posting like, I usually try to read a book a week on my morning run, and so I usually post what book I'm listening to, and sometimes other stuff that I'm looking at. And I should probably be more active in like posting that more. I'm not super active on social media, but yeah, I mean, the clinic blog. If you go to unlockbodyworks.com, I you know write up a blog every couple months usually and talk about a point of interest, usually in regards to healthcare. Um, Sometimes other just point of interest things. So
Cool.
yeah.
Thank you so much. I'm gonna go ahead and close up this chat.